Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning and welcome to the course on History of English Language and Literature. We all know that the supreme contribution of the Elizabethan age was that of the Elizabethan drama exemplified by Shakespeare, which is why the golden age of Elizabethan period was also known as the age of Shakespeare. In today's session, we will be taking a look at the drama before Shakespeare, mapping through some of the predecessors of drama proper. In fact, it's very important to note at the beginning that the Greek and Roman traditions had a very thriving dramatic tradition in place, but however, when it comes to the Middle English period in England, we do not see much of an influence of any of those Greek or Roman plays taking part over there. And in fact, the English dramatic tradition which begins to emerge from the Middle English period through the Elizabethan period, it has got hardly anything to do with the ancient classical drama. In that sense, we can even say that the English dramatic tradition owes very little to that of the ancient classical tradition. So, some of the predecessors of drama before Shakespeare could be named as follows, like mystery plays, miracle plays, morality plays and the interludes. In fact, each of these kinds of drama, they had a very short life and they did not thrive beyond a certain particular historical period, and their content was largely religious, moral, as their titles imply as well. And however, it's very important to take a look at these traditions in order to be able to properly understand how and why Shakespeare wrote in particular ways and how Elizabethan drama came to be featured in certain historical ways. So, moving on, we will first take a look at the mystery plays which had begun to emerged from the 11th and 12th centuries, which is right after the Norman conquest. So, it's very interesting that the drama had a past which is as early as the Norman tradition itself. The rebirth of drama after the classical traditions of Greek and Roman plays, it had its rebirth in fact within the church premises. It was the church and its liturgy who began to develop the first forms of drama. This was in fact primarily conceived as a way to teach Bible to the illiterate commoners, because Bible was then written and popularized mainly in Latin and the other languages which were not accessible to the commoners. So, the clergy thought of an innovative way to reach Bible to the commoners, and they thought of enacting plays and enacting stories from the Bible which would be of interest to the commoners. This was also a way to teach them about the ways of the word and also introduce them to the various historical and biblical aspects as well. So, these were primarily liturgical dramas. So, as the name implies, the content was primarily from the Bible and the actors were also predominantly from the clergy and who were part of the church. And due to its didactic purpose and due to this thematic structure, it was entirely under the church control. So, it's very interesting to note that in the beginning, church had a very important role to play in the development of drama, just as a way church continued to control many of the socio-political and economic affairs of those times. The name mystery needs a little bit of attention. Mystery in fact means religious truth. It used to mean religious truth during those times, and also meant secret when it was translated from the French language. Latin and French being the dominant languages of those times, mystery plays seemed quite appropriate name for them, and they were mostly based on scenes and stories from the Bible. And one interesting aspect in terms of language is that since they were adaptations from the Bible for the commoners, Latin began to be heavily replaced by the vernacular, in the English which was prevalent during that time. And the venue also, it's quite an interesting shift that happens across our period. The venue was initially right outside the cathedral, because these plays were staged for the commoners who came to attend the church, and gradually as the numbers increase and the popularity increases, we find that the venue shifts to the town square where more people can attend and also more kinds of elaborate arrangements could be made, and gradually it even shifts to a form of pageant pageants. Pageants are very important in the history of drama because they were more like a travelling drama company. They used to have these boxes within huge vehicles which had actors in place, which also had elaborate arrangements. They used to travel across the town, and people used to gather at different points of different corners in order to watch the drama which is being staged. So the venue gradually shifts from the church towards the town center, and the control also gradually, we begin to see that the control of these drama, their themes, their organization, everything begins to shift from the church to the other areas outside that. So as time progresses, we begin to note that church no longer supports or facilitates these dramas. It's the guilds. Guilds is mainly the group of people, the merchants who come together, who form certain who they raise the finances, they take decisions together. They also end up ruling the town square in the name of a council. So the control gradually shifts from the church towards these tradesmen's guilds. So we also note that just as these changes take place, the actors also begin to change. The clergy are no longer then permitted to be a part of these acting teams, but then others, commoners, who are the merchants, the peasants who are part of the guilds, they all replace the clergy as actors also. At this context, it's important to remember this edict of 1210, which forbade clergy from participating in any of these dramatic forms. And this is also a moment when we witness a growing secularization of the drama. So this also leads us to another kind of drama called the miracle plays. It's very important to distinguish between mystery plays and miracle plays at this point, because many tend to confuse one with the other. Mystery plays were, as we already have noted, they were largely based on stories from the Bible, so in a way that it enacted the stories exactly as they were shown in the Bible. But miracle plays had a freedom to differ a bit from the Bible and also introduce the stories of the lives of saints, their biography, and how certain common instances could be related to the events from the Bible, so on and so forth. In that sense, it could be considered as a little more secular than the mystery play, though both continue to be played in England during the same time. And the actors of these were not clergy at all. They were mostly common people, tradesmen, and whoever was interested in acting could come and join this. And also until Shakespeare's time, it's very significant to note that female actors were not in place. All the parts, even the ones played by females, were taken by male actors. So this was more or less a show run entirely by men. And in these miracle plays, through the lives of saints, through the lives of certain commoners who had God's calling, so on and so forth, we found a storyline emerging which was emphasizing God's will. This continued to be religious and ritualistic, but it also focused on a practical application of the stories of the Bible. And there is evidence which shows that these plays were staged, miracle plays were staged across almost 40 districts in England during the medieval period. And these plays were organized, they were funded, they were taken care of entirely by trading guilds. There were four major, something that we can call as companies which were promoting these miracle plays during that period. They also used to run these plays in a cycle in the sense of something which a storyline which would have a full circle, like in the beginning there would be the creation, and the play would end with the fall of man and the consequences of it, or else it would begin with the life of Christ and would complete an entire cycle focusing through the events of his crucifixion, his resurrection, his second coming, so on and so forth. In that sense, they used to complete an entire cycle focusing on the storylines within the Bible and also connecting it with a practical application for the commoners. So there were four different cycles like this: the Chester cycle, the Coventry, the Wakefield, and the York. And there is a lot of historical evidence to prove that they had continued to exist even during Shakespeare's times. It is said that Shakespeare must have witnessed at least one of these plays which was getting staged in Coventry. These names were in fact after the names of the places where most of these plays were continuing to get staged. So Shakespeare's plays, when one began to read them and analyze them, many critics and historians have felt that there is a major influence of these miracle plays in the way he began to conceive his theatre, his idea of stage, so on and so forth. And some of the other common plays used to be the Three Marys, focusing on the different characters of Mary from the Bible, the Shepherd's Play, which was mostly the nativity scene which was being put up for the commoners, and also there is the feast of the Corpus Christi that continued to have a lot of importance. This was like one of the major feasts, just like Easter. So there used to be these different cycles which were continued to be played for almost for 12 to 14 days at a stretch. So it began to be known as collective mysteries, and importantly all the merchants, the tradesmen, everyone used to take a day off from their work. So this was mostly a holiday season as well, when Corpus Christi collective mysteries began to be staged. In that sense, we do begin to see that the beginnings of this mass entertainment and collective entertainment begins from as early as the 13th century onwards. And this had begun to pave way to another kind of plays known as the morality plays. This is in the by the end of the 14th century. Here we find a very radical shift from the biblical stories, from the thematic structure which was mostly concentrating on church, so on and so forth. Here the theme and the treatment was mostly allegorical, and later on when we begin to look at the forms of poetry which began to emerge in England from the early Elizabethan period onwards, it would be noted that allegorical poetry had begun to enjoy a lot of success and fame in Elizabethan England. So in a way, morality plays and the allegorical nature of them began to lead England towards a kind of poetry and a kind of genre that they would begin to enjoy. So this allegory was very interesting in the sense that these plays had abstract characters and virtues, abstract emotions and virtues as real characters, like faith would be one character, truth, charity, good deeds, justice, mercy, etc. were personified as characters. This would also remind us that in the later centuries to come, many of these personifications of characters have their roots in the early morality plays, and these fine virtues would also be contrasted against virtues against vices such as falsehood, covetousness, gluttony, etc. So these positive virtues would be showcased as the protagonist and the vices as the antagonists of the play. And there was also this character of the vice, V-I-C-E, the vice, who would also give a kind of a comic interlude to these plays. And in fact, one of the critics have described these morality plays as allegorical stories where characters battle for the control of the soul. This also reminds us briefly about Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, about which we would be discussing a couple of sessions later when we do Elizabethan drama. And these morality plays significantly, they lay the foundations of characterization in drama, especially in the Elizabethan drama and the English drama that followed afterwards. And these were mostly about moral behavior, as the title would imply. But ironically, as time progressed, they were not entirely about morality. In fact, there was a lot of immorality which was getting celebrated within the plot structure of these morality plays. Because of this, since the earlier kinds of plays, the mystery plays and the miracle plays, were overtly didactic, overtly moralistic, commoners in fact began to enjoy the kind of immorality which was getting celebrated in a subtle way within these morality plays. This also had led to a lot of immense popularity for these morality plays, because they always gave a different kind of entertainment to the English public from the 14th century onwards. And one of the most celebrated and the most common of these morality plays is the one which is named as Every Man. The authorship is disputed, it's best left at being anonymous. This was in 1490, towards the end of the 15th century. In fact, Every Man continues to be staged in minor ways even in the contemporary. That also talks about the universality and the relevance of the play Every Man from the 15th century. And this, the plot structure was mainly about the was about a contest between the virtues and vices, and it also had subtle humor in it, because there is this character who's called as Every Man, who can be almost every man, as the title implies, and death comes to him and gives him an invitation to reach God, and then every man is very reluctant to leave earth and leave along with death to reach God. So he is looking for a companion to accompany him to God. So he goes along meeting various people, his relatives, his friends, and goes on asking them whether they would be interested in joining him in this journey towards God, and almost everyone says no. In fact, there are a couple of comic interventions in between. There is this cousin that every man goes to and asks him if he would like to accompany him on this journey to meet God, and the cousin says, I would have loved to, except for this tiny toe problem that I have got. So and it was all hugely entertaining for the common people, and even here keeping in tune with the tradition of morality plays, all the characters and names such as good deeds, justice, vice, gluttony, charity, truth, faith, etc. So every man approaches all of these characters who are also his relatives and friends, and towards the end we find that good deeds is the only character who decides to accompany him on his way to reaching God. So this also has an implied moral, and it also had a continued relevance in the sense that when the time comes for anyone to meet God through death, it is only perhaps the good deeds which would accompany him. So this kind of interventions through the morality plays, it had a lot of philosophical undertones. It also tried in a very different way, other than the miracle and the morality plays, to bring in a theological discussion among the commoners, and also led them to ask questions about life in general, about the reality of death, about the abstractions of life after death, so on and so forth. And amidst all these things, a lot of things happen in terms of the social and historical background. In the previous lectures, we have also recollected how plague continued to attack, how the fortunes of England go up and down because of the interference of church, because of the growing corruption, because of the cosmopolitanism that is gradually setting in, because of the mass migration from the rural hinterlands to the city of London. All of these things are happening in the background, and by the mid 15th century we find that for a brief period the church outlaws all kinds of performances, because the church found it increasingly difficult to deal with the criticisms that were coming through these plays, and also that commoners were getting quite so much interested in all these things that they also knew how to engage with biblical concepts and biblical stories from a critical angle as well. So due to this and due to the various other reasons, and since with the morality play, the play also had moved far away from the church settings and also from the theological themes, the church outlaws the performances, and the theatres were then built only outside the city walls. And for a brief period, this was also to contain the spread of the plague, which was becoming quite a prevalent thing during that time. And then by mid 16th century, there is again a revival, and we find that the interludes become more common during this period. So by this time, England had left behind the miracle plays, the mystery plays, and interludes could be considered as a higher and advanced kind of morality plays. This was in fact structured in such a way that this had real characters, no more abstract emotions or abstract virtues. This had real characters, and the play used to be very short. There was always a sense of humor which was woven into this as well. So we find a radical shift from abstract qualities to individuals, and most of these individuals were also real, so much so that some of the commoners could even relate to the characters who were being represented on stage. They could be from the court, they could be one of the council members, they could be one of the tradesmen that they knew round the corner. So it had a very different kind of appeal to the commoners then. In this interludes, we also see the beginnings of social satire as well. And we also find a complete absence of allegorical figures over there. There is a sense of very real representations coming in, so things are no longer subtle, because but they are on the contrary right on one's face. And we also find a radical shift from morality to that of comedy. This is also the time when the foundations of the subtle English humour are being laid in medieval England. And one of the most prominent writers, playwrights of this time was John Heywood. John Heywood was a court musician. He was also one of the prominent entertainers at Henry VIII's court. Henry VIII, if you remember, is the king who broke away from Roman Catholic Church and had his own Church of England. And John Heywood's play The Four Ps was immensely popular during the mid-16th century. It continued to have a lasting appeal even in the later Elizabethan period. The four Ps in fact signify a peddler, a palmer, a pardoner and an apothecary, people from different walks of life. And the plot of the play was about a lying match between all of these four people. So this had a lot of humor built into it, a lot of satire built into it. It is said that the commoners could even identify who these four real characters were. So in that sense, it also enjoyed immense popularity during this time. So with these sort of settings, we find English drama achieving a foundational stage from the 16th century onwards. And in the 16th century, especially from the 1550s onwards, we find a renewed interest in pagan antiquity. If you remember at the beginning, we noted that the miracle plays and the morality plays had very little to do with the ancient classical tradition. They had moved away from the Roman and Greek plays, and they had their own standards, their own kind of stages, so on and so forth. By mid 1550s, there is a revival in pagan antiquity, and this is also the time when Renaissance is running high in Europe and also in England. So because of these reasons, the comedies of Plautus and Terence, the tragedies of Seneca, all of this have a huge influence in shaping English drama from the 16th century. At the same time, very important to note that they also had a lot of native elements, in the sense Elizabethan stage becomes a very native kind of a thing, a native structure which the playwrights within Britain had begun, within England had begun to conceive and begun to popularize. So from the 16th century onwards, through the age of Shakespeare, through the age of Elizabeth, we see that there are these classical influences coming in, but also a native tradition begins to be forged. So we will also see in detail in one of the later sessions about how the Elizabethan drama, how the English drama was different from that of the classical dramas of the ancient times. And there were also a lot of Latin imitations which were getting enacted in the universities of the period. As you remember from the previous sessions, the university centres of Oxford and Cambridge had by now become the centres of intellectual excellence, and many of these universities began to encourage the staging of plays in Latin by imitating from the earlier stalwarts from Greek and Latin. And this is the time when English comedy begins to emerge in this in its full being. Nicholas Udall, who was also the headmaster of Eton, one of the most famous ancient public schools in Britain, his comedy Ralph Royster Doyster, this was published in staged and published in 1551. This was considered as the first real English comedy from the 16th century, and this continues. There are a lot of disputes about whether this qualifies itself as the first comedy or not, but in literary histories it continues to hold the distinction of being the first real English comedy. There was also another comic play which was hugely popular during those times. It's called Gamma Gurton's Needle in 1575. Apart from the humor that it had, this play was also important for the latter periods, for the latter historians and for the critics, because it showed glimpses of English life, of 16th century English life through the play. And tragedy was also quite significant and important during this time. We also find different genres getting formed in terms of keeping in tune with the dramatic tradition. The Thomas Sackville and Norton together had produced this tragedy called Gorboduc in 1562. This was also in blank verse, which had a continuing impact on the way English drama was getting framed. And at this point, it's important to note that the classical antiquity had excelled itself in the presentation of tragedies. And when Sackville and Norton had their first tragedy, Gorboduc, this had classical elements in it, but they had also broken away significantly from the classical theme. So there was a lot of ways in which the English drama was trying to project itself as distinct, as more native and freer from foreign influences, but at the same time a servile imitation of classical models continued to exist, at least for a while, because there were a lot of poor imitations of works from Greek and Roman histories. There were also people who had merely translated the works from the classical antiquity and tried to pass it on as an original work. And there were also historical plays which began to dominate this time. They were in fact a more dramatized form of the early chronicles. They featured the lives of kings, the lives of great warriors, the lives of knights, so on and so forth. And these kinds of plays in fact combined comic and tragic elements. Some of these we would be seeing in a later session. This kind of combination of tragedy and comedy was very important, because in the classical sense a play could either be entirely tragic or it could be entirely based on comedy. But this the history plays gave a new forum where the English dramatists and the English playwrights could experiment by bringing in the elements of comedy and tragedy within a single play. With this, we begin to see that a proper foundation is laid for Elizabethan drama. The stage is being set for great stalwarts like Shakespeare and others to emerge from the Elizabethan period onwards. So, in the next session, we would begin to take a look at how these foundational elements were very significant in shaping the kind of drama that Elizabethan England began to witness. This influence was exemplified not just in the structure and theme of drama, but also in the way the idea of the theatre began to be conceived, the way theatre begins to be commercialized, so on and so forth. So, we look forward to the next session where we will be talking in a greater detail about what exactly paved the way towards the emergence of Elizabethan drama as exemplified in the age of Shakespeare. Thank you for listening, and this is all we have for today.